All right, so buckle up, because today we're diving deep into the future of warfare. We're talking 2035 to 2050.
Yeah, and we've got a whole stack of research here, military strategy documents, tech predictions, expert analysis, some really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it's like a peek into a whole different world.
Yeah.
You know, declassified military stuff, cutting edge research on things like nanotech, biotech. We're even looking at how warfare is already changing right now.
Yeah, and one thing that really jumps out is it's not just about tanks and jets anymore.
Right. If it's not traditional warfare, what are we even talking about then? What's this future battlefield going to look like?
Well, by 2035, the world's going to be a very different place. Technology is advancing so fast.
Yeah, exponentially. Right. Like that's what all the sources say.
Exactly, and that leads to hyperconnectivity, globalization on a whole new level.
Okay, so paint me a picture here. What does that even mean? Like, what are we actually talking about?
Think instant communication across continents, a totally global economy, individuals with incredible power thanks to new tech.
So no more soldiers in trenches.
Yeah, no more trenches. That image is totally obsolete.
Okay, so where are they then? What does that even look like?
The battlefield of the future, it spans multiple domains: land, sea, air, space, and cyberspace. It's not just one battlefield. Conflicts will play out across all of them at the same time.
Give me an example. How could that actually work? I mean, how would a conflict even play out across all those domains?
Okay, imagine a conflict erupts over resources in the Arctic. You could see traditional naval forces fighting over shipping lanes.
Okay, makes sense.
But at the same time, you've got cyber attacks happening thousands of miles away, crippling communication networks, disrupting satellites.
Wow.
Then on top of that, you could have space-based weapons taking out critical infrastructure and specialized drones, gathering intel, disrupting enemy ops.
That's like everything's happening at once.
It is. It's all interconnected, everything influencing everything else.
Man, that sounds insanely complicated. How do you even define victory in a conflict like that?
That's the thing. The whole definition of victory is changing in this multi-domain world.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's not about capturing territory anymore or just defeating the enemy's forces. It's about achieving specific strategic objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And that might involve, well, a whole combination of things: military action, economic pressure, information warfare.
It's like a whole different game.
It is. It's a whole different game. And the way militaries are structured, how they're equipped, that's changing too.
Right, right. Our sources talked about that. Moving away from the few, expensive, and manned approach.
Yeah, it's shifting towards a many, cheaper, and unmanned approach.
Can you explain that a bit more? I mean, what does that actually mean?
Well, instead of investing in, let's say, a small number of super expensive fighter jets, you might deploy swarms of cheaper drones.
Oh, interesting. So it's like overwhelming the enemy with numbers.
Exactly. They can overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers.
That makes sense. But does that mean future wars will be less destructive? With fewer human casualties because of the unmanned systems and all?
That's a good question, but not necessarily. While unmanned systems might reduce the risk to soldiers on the front lines, they also bring up a lot of ethical questions.
Like what?
For example, who's responsible when an autonomous drone makes a mistake and causes civilian casualties? And how do we ensure that these systems are used ethically and responsibly?
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's not as simple as it seems.
It's not simple at all. It gets even more complicated when you factor in the competition for resources.
You're talking resource wars.
Exactly. Think about it. Water, energy, the raw materials needed for all this advanced tech we've been talking about, it's all becoming more scarce.
Mhm.
And that increases the potential for conflict.
Okay, so walk me through this. What could a resource war look like in this future world? With all this hyperconnectivity and tech and everything.
Well, our sources highlight a few specific examples. Take the Arctic, for instance. The ice caps are melting.
Right.
And that's opening up new shipping routes and potentially tons of oil and natural gas.
Like a new gold rush, but for oil.
Exactly. And nations like Russia, China, the US, they're already competing for control up there. The potential for conflict is very real.
And it's not just about the oil, right? It's about control, strategic advantage.
Absolutely. Control of the Arctic could give a nation a massive advantage. Trade routes, military positioning, you name it.
Our sources also talked about water scarcity and how that could trigger conflict.
Water is already a source of tension in a lot of parts of the world, and climate change is making it worse.
Yeah, makes sense.
Imagine two countries that share a river, right? And one country decides to build a dam upstream, cutting off the other's water supply. That could easily escalate into a full-blown conflict.
It's not just about survival either, is it? Water's essential for everything. Agriculture, industry.
It is, and a shortage could cripple an entire economy, lead to instability, social unrest, you name it.
Wow, okay. So we've got oil, water, what else?
Oh, and then there's critical minerals, rare earth elements, other raw materials. They're needed for all sorts of things: smartphones, electric cars, even weapon systems. As demand goes up, competition for access to these minerals could get intense.
So the phone I'm holding right now, the stuff inside, that could be a future battleground.
It's possible, and it shows how interconnected the world is becoming. What happens in one part of the world impacts everyone, everywhere.
It's a bit unsettling when you think about it like that.
Yeah, and it's not just wars between nations anymore either. Our sources talked a lot about non-state actors and how they're gaining influence in future conflicts.
Non-state actors, meaning.
We're talking groups like terrorist organizations, criminal networks, even just really influential individuals. They can use these same technological advances to disrupt things, challenge the traditional powers.
Give me an example. How could they do that?
Think of groups like ISIS using social media to recruit and spread propaganda, or hackers launching cyber attacks on governments or infrastructure.
So basically, anyone with the right tech can be a player on the global stage now.
Yeah, in a sense. And
Yeah.
that makes the whole landscape of future warfare incredibly complex and unpredictable. We can't just focus on traditional military threats from other countries anymore. We have to be ready for all kinds of challenges, coming from anywhere, playing out in ways we can't even predict.
Speaking of unpredictable, we got to talk about cyber warfare. Our sources go into some pretty scary detail about how impactful that could be.
Oh, absolutely. Cyber warfare is already happening, and it's only going to get more prevalent in the coming decades. This is the silent battlefield, fought with keystrokes, but the consequences can be absolutely devastating.
Like, what kind of damage are we talking about here? Give me an example.
Well, imagine this. Hackers get into a country's power grid.
Okay.
They could shut down whole cities. Imagine the chaos, the economic disruption. Or they could target financial systems, wipe out bank accounts, crash global markets.
That's terrifying. And the scary thing is, these attacks can come from anywhere, right? Anyone with the skills and resources can do this.
Exactly, and that's what makes it so difficult. Attributing attacks, figuring out who's responsible, it can be almost impossible. So how do you deter someone if you don't even know who they are?
It's like the lines are blurring everywhere, you know? War and peace,
Yeah.
physical and virtual battlefields, it's all getting mixed up. So where do we even go from here? How do we wrap our heads around all this?
That's the big question, and it's something we're going to explore in more detail in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at the specific technologies, the ethical dilemmas, the strategic challenges. It's a lot to unpack.
Okay, so we've kind of laid out the battlefield of the future, right? This complex, interconnected world, threats coming from everywhere, non-state actors getting involved. It's a lot.
It is.
But what about the actual tools of this future war? Our sources mentioned some pretty mind-blowing technology.
Oh, yeah, some really wild stuff.
Yeah.
Let's start with something you might already know about, but with a military twist. 3D printing.
3D printing. I mean, yeah, it's revolutionizing manufacturing, but how does that fit into warfare?
Well, on the future battlefield, 3D printing could be a game changer.
No, I'm listening.
Imagine this. Instead of relying on these huge supply chains that are super vulnerable to attack,
Yeah.
a forward operating base could just print whatever they need. Custom drones, replacement parts, even specialized weapons, all tailored for that specific mission.
So no more waiting weeks for a spare part to be shipped from halfway across the world.
Exactly, that's the idea.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it gives you a level of agility and adaptability that we've never seen before. Plus, it makes it way harder for the enemy to predict what you're going to do.
Right. Disrupt your capabilities. Okay, so that's 3D printing. What about something a little more, I don't know, sci-fi? Our sources mentioned nanotechnology. Sounds like something straight out of a movie.
Nanotech is definitely on the cutting edge. We're talking about manipulating matter at the atomic level, creating materials with properties we can barely even imagine right now.
Okay, give me an example. What could you actually do with that?
Think about a soldier's uniform. What if it was woven with carbon nanotubes? It would be lighter than Kevlar, but could still stop a bullet.
Whoa, wait, so bulletproof clothing that feels like a t-shirt.
It's not as crazy as it sounds. Nanotech could also lead to self-healing materials. Imagine a tank that can repair its own armor after getting hit, or a fighter jet that can seal its own leaks mid-flight.
That sounds pretty incredible, but also a little scary, right? What if this tech gets into the wrong hands?
It's a valid concern.
But-
Like any powerful technology, nanotech can be used for good or bad. That's why international cooperation is so important, and having ethical guidelines in place. We need to make sure this stuff is used responsibly.
I hear that. Okay, let's move on to another area that's blurring the lines between science fiction and reality. Biotechnology.
Yeah.
Our sources talked about using biotech to enhance soldiers' capabilities, which sound kind of wild.
It is pretty wild. Biotechnology is advancing at an incredible pace.
Yeah.
Gene editing, synthetic biology, even the potential to enhance human performance in ways we never thought possible.
Wait, hold on. Enhance human performance.
Hmm.
Are we talking super soldiers here?
Not exactly like in the movies, but the potential is there. Imagine drugs that could dramatically increase stamina, so soldiers could operate for days without sleep, or gene therapies to speed up wound healing, making them more resilient in combat.
I mean, that's pretty fascinating, but also a little unnerving, right? Where do we draw the line between therapy and enhancement? And what happens when we start creating soldiers who are basically superhuman?
Those are the ethical questions we need to be asking as a society. The future of warfare isn't just about technological progress, it's about using that technology responsibly.
Right, right. It's not just about the tech itself. Okay, one last technology we need to talk about. Artificial intelligence, AI. This one seems like it has the potential to change everything about war.
Oh, absolutely. AI is already changing the battlefield. We're seeing it in everything from drones to target recognition systems, cyber defense, intelligence analysis, you name it.
Yeah, AI is everywhere these days. But what does an AI-driven battlefield actually look like? Are we talking robots fighting wars for us? Like in the Terminator or something?
It's not quite that dramatic, not yet anyway. But imagine an AI system analyzing real-time data from all over the battlefield. Satellites, drones, sensors, all feeding into the system.
Okay.
It can identify threats, predict enemy movements, even suggest the best course of action for human commanders.
Wow. That's a lot of power.
Hmm.
But what about the risk? What happens if an AI makes a mistake or goes rogue?
That's the big concern with AI, right? As we give more and more decision-making power to machines, we need to be incredibly careful about how we design and control those systems. We have to make sure humans are still in the loop, even as AI gets more sophisticated.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've got 3D printing changing logistics, nanotech creating these super materials, biotech pushing the limits of human performance, and AI transforming decision-making. It's a lot.
It is. It's a lot to process, and these technologies are all developing so fast.
And they can all be combined too, right? I mean, that's what really blows my mind.
That's right. You can combine them to create completely new capabilities. Imagine a swarm of autonomous drones, each one equipped with 3D printed weapons powered by AI. That could completely overwhelm any traditional defense.
That's a pretty intense image. It's like a giant puzzle, and we're just starting to see how the pieces fit together.
And the picture that's emerging is one of incredible opportunity, but also significant risk. We need to make sure these technologies are used responsibly, ethically, to create a future where conflict is less likely and the costs of war are minimized.
Right. And speaking of the human element, our sources also talked about how soldiers themselves will need to adapt to this new battlefield. It seems like it's going to take more than just physical strength and courage to be a soldier in the future.
Oh, absolutely. The demands on soldiers in the future are going to be greater than ever. They'll need to be tech-savvy, adaptable, able to work seamlessly with AI systems.
So, like, what does that even look like?
Think about it. A soldier might be leading a squad of robots, analyzing data from multiple sources, and making life or death decisions in an environment that's constantly changing.
It sounds like they'll need to be part soldier, part engineer, part data analyst, all rolled into one.
Exactly. They'll also need a strong understanding of the ethical implications of this new tech. It's one thing to operate a drone remotely, but it's another thing entirely to be responsible for its actions, especially if those actions have unintended consequences.
It's a heavy burden. It seems like we're talking about a whole new breed of soldier.
Okay.
But our sources also suggest that the future of warfare might actually depend on a revival of something we haven't talked about much: strategic thinking.
That's right. In a world of hyperconnectivity and super fast decision-making, it's easy to think technology will have all the answers. But it's just not true. Technology is a tool.
So it's not just about having the coolest gadgets or the biggest weapons.
Exactly. The key is going to be having smart, thoughtful leaders who can develop and execute good strategies. Using technology effectively, yes, but never letting it completely dictate how we engage in conflict.
That makes sense.
In a world where algorithms can process tons of data and make recommendations in a fraction of a second, it's even more important to have humans who can step back, see the bigger picture, make judgments based on experience and intuition, judgments based on a deep understanding of human conflict.
So it's not just about technology, it's about how we use it. And that human element is still essential.
Absolutely. The future of warfare, it's not set in stone. It's being shaped right now by the choices we make, the technologies we develop, the values we prioritize. Ultimately, it's up to us to decide what kind of future we want to create.
That's a powerful thought. So we've talked about the tech that's changing warfare, how soldiers need to adapt. But what about the bigger picture? How does all this impact the world we live in, and what can we do to prepare for the challenges ahead? That's something we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive. We've talked about this future battlefield, the tech, the soldiers, but what does it all mean for, the average person? How does any of this actually impact our everyday lives?
It's a good question, and it's one we should all be asking. The future of warfare, it's not some abstract concept happening somewhere else. It's something that's going to shape the world we live in, the choices we make, the future we build.
Yeah, I can see that. So how do we even begin to wrap our heads around all of this? It's so complex and it's changing so fast. Our sources talked about some pretty big shifts in how we even think about conflict and warfare.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that stood out to me was the blurring of lines. The lines between the physical and virtual battlefields, between state and non-state actors, even the lines between offense and defense, it's all getting harder and harder to define.
It's like someone threw out the old rule book and we're all trying to figure out the new rules of the game, right?
Exactly. And that's why strategic thinking is more important than ever. We can't just wait and react to threats as they pop up. We need to be anticipating them, understanding how all these trends connect, and developing proactive strategies that account for this new complexity.
Our sources kept mentioning a renaissance in strategic thinking. What does that even mean?
It means moving beyond these traditional military doctrines and embracing a more holistic view of security, recognizing that the best solutions might not involve military force at all.
So instead of just building bigger bombs and training more soldiers, we need to be thinking about things like diplomacy, economic influence, even using technology to prevent conflict in the first place.
Exactly. It's about understanding that the future of warfare isn't just about who has the biggest guns anymore. It's about who can use all the tools available, military, economic, diplomatic, informational, to achieve their goals. Think of it like a giant chess game where the board is constantly changing and the pieces are more diverse and unpredictable than ever before.
Okay, yeah, that's a pretty intense image. So understanding these trends, these challenges, it's not just something for generals and politicians to worry about anymore, right? It affects all of us.
You're absolutely right. The future of warfare will impact everyone. The world we live in, the choices we make, the future we build for ourselves and future generations. So as you go about your day, as you read the news, as you interact with the world, keep these insights in mind.
So what you're saying is think about how these trends connect to our own lives, our work, our communities.
Exactly. And even more importantly, ask yourself, what role can I play in shaping a future where conflict is less likely and the costs of war are minimized?
Those are big questions.
They are, but they're questions worth asking. Because the future of warfare isn't predetermined. We're all shaping it, whether we realize it or not.
So stay curious, keep learning, and be ready to adapt. Because the world's changing faster than ever before. That's what this whole deep dive has been about. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you on the next one.